Hello and welcome to Uncovering Our Hidden History. My name is Anna. I'm a genealogist and historical researcher, and I use these two tools together in my quest to uncover hidden history that has been hidden from us or we've been lied to about. And so on today's video, we're going to jump right in and we're going to learn about the Sephardic Jews, aka Hebrews. So I'll see you in a few minutes. Hello friends, I am so happy to be back here with you. It's been a while, and boy, it's been a hectic few weeks, and it's been a lot of warfare, not gonna lie. And I want to thank each and every one of you that responded to my SOS for intercessory prayer and prayer coverage a week or two ago, and so grateful for you guys, and helped me. I really did feel those prayers, and it helped me to be able to get these slides done for this presentation. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. It's going to be a long one, which I feel like I owe you guys that anyway. So okay, let me pull up my PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so just a recap for maybe the people who haven't been with us before. Maybe this is your first time with us. I do highly encourage you, click on the channel's icon, and it will take you to the playlist tab, or a few tabs, and you can choose the playlist tab. And I would suggest starting with the Kingdom of Israel in Tartaria and the Americas video series first, and then you can catch up with this in the Kingdom of Judah. But just to recap, this is our 6th video. This is going to be part 6A. And the very first video we did was on the destruction of Jerusalem. And then we covered all the other different Judean tribes all over the place. And so, so today we are going to jump right in to the Sephardic and Portuguese Hebrews. Sephardic first. And so this is probably going to be a 3 or 4 part series at least. There's so much information. Okay, so let's get going. So this again is Sephardic and Portuguese Hebrews, part 6A. Our handy dandy copyright disclaimer for fair use purposes. All right, let's do a little bit. I want to give a little bit of backstory to the area that we're going to be talking about. It has a really rich history. So if you look at the map that I have here, we've got the Iberian Peninsula in the upper left corner, and then the Roman Republic in the upper right corner, and then North Africa, right, with Numidia, Carthage, and then the whole Carthaginian Empire. And so that was basically what was here anciently. So there were thriving Phoenician trading colonies, which again, remember the Carthaginians. So the Carthaginians, the Phoenicians, they all go back. They're Canaanites. Okay, they're all Canaanites. Now, the Phoenicians were in the city of Tyre, and to be fair, I think they probably would have called themselves Tyrrhenians, And it was the Greeks actually that called them Phoenicians. And then when Alexander the Great came in and destroyed the kingdom of Tyre, and I think even probably before that, there was a group of Phoenicians that traveled west and settled in Carthage, and they became called the Carthaginians. And then after Tyre was destroyed, many of the survivors of Tyre joined the Carthaginians. Some other ones went into the Americas. Actually, I think there's probably been many Canaanites in the Americas since the time of Joshua and Caleb, when they drove all the Canaanites out of the land of Canaan. Okay, so that's who we're talking about here. They are actually Canaanites from Ham. So it says, thriving Phoenician trading colonies, which by 500 BCE had come under the control of Carthage, were located on the southern coast of the peninsula. So also were a smaller number of Greek colonies. Carthage was a city-state founded by the Phoenicians on the coast of North Africa sometime in the early first millennium BCE. Or BC. The traditional date of its founding was 814 BC, with a group of Phoenician settlers from Tyre, a great port city on the coast of present-day Lebanon. It's thought that after Alexander the Great decimated Tyre in 332 BC, the survivors fled to join their relatives in Carthage. In the rest of the peninsula, Celtic culture or Celtic culture dominated. So the term Celts or Celts, from the Greek Keltoi, or which means barbarian, refers to a people who lived in a large area of Central and Western Europe in the second part of the first millennium BCE. They spoke a language belonging to the Indo-European group of languages, and so were related to other European peoples such as the Italians, Greeks, and Germans. The Celts, or the Celts, had developed, I never really know how to pronounce that. So those of you who are from Ireland, please, Ireland and Scotland, please don't forgive my mispronunciation if I'm doing that wrong. The Celts had developed a distinct culture by the 9th century BCE in their original homeland of present-day Austria, Switzerland, and southern Germany. They then expanded westwards into what is now France from the 8th century, having adopted the Iron Age technologies coming in from the south and the east. And that was from Britannica. Okay, and I am covering, let me pull this over. The Celts soon covered most of today's France and Belgium. From France, they moved southwest into what became Spain, mingling with the Iberian tribes to form the Celt-Iberian people. Like other early European peoples, they were polytheists, meaning they worshipped many gods, worshipping a variety of gods and goddesses. Pull that back. Eventually, some of their group moved further southeast into the Balkans, eventually arriving in Greece in the early 3rd century BC. Here they caused immense destruction before crossing over into Asia Minor, and defeated by the local kings there, they settled down to form the kingdom of Galatia, which is talked about in Scripture. You know what, let's go back here for a quick second. I just want you guys to really pay attention to the map. Okay, so Gaul, you can see, is in the upper right corner, or the upper right top portion, and then you've got the Celts, Iberians, and then the other Iberians within the Iberian Peninsula. Okay, and then I think hopefully I have another map, but Gaul went on to, like I said, encompass France and then what became of Spain. And so I want to make sure I don't get ahead of myself here, but just in case, again, that we have any new people, feel free to take screenshots of these slides for your own research purposes. That's totally fine to do. Okay, so then we come to Roman Hispania. The Iberian Peninsula was a military theater during the Second Punic War, which was 218 to 201 BC, which was waged between Carthage and the Roman Republic, the two powers vying for supremacy in the Western Mediterranean. The Romans expelled the Carthaginians from the peninsula in 206 BC. So if any of you ever read the story of, I think his name was Hannibal, he was a Carthaginian. And there's that whole war, the Punic Wars. The peoples whom the Romans met at the time of their invasion were the Iberians, who inhabited an area stretching from the northeast part of the Iberian Peninsula through the southeast. The Celts mostly inhabited the inner and northwest part of the peninsula. The Romans improved existing cities such as Tarragona and established others like Zaragoza, Merida, Valencia, Leon, Badajoz, and Palencia. The peninsula's economy expanded under Roman rule, and Hispania supplied Rome with food, olive oil, wine, and metal. Okay, so Hispania was the term that was used long before it ever was called Spain. Okay, I'm kind of covering the little label, but it just says that this map is showing the Iberian Peninsula circa 196 BC. Okay, and it said Roman geographers and other prose writers from the time of the late Roman Republic called the entire peninsula Hispania. As they became politically interested in the former Carthaginian territories, the Romans began to use the names Hispania Citerior and Hispania Ulterior for near and far Hispania. At the time, Hispania was made up of three Roman provinces: Hispania Baetica, Hispania Tarraconensis, and Hispania Lusitania. Strabo says that the Romans used Hispania and Iberia synonymously, distinguishing between the near northern and the far southern provinces. So again, just to recap, this was primarily Carthaginian territory, and then the Romans and the Carthaginians went to war during the Punic Wars. The Carthaginians lost, and the Romans became the conquerors, and so then they took over all of that territory, or most of the territory that had been Carthaginian. And then they started calling it Hispania. Several Roman rulers were either born in Hispania, which is its name before being called Spain, or significantly expanded Roman influence there. Emperors Trajan, Hadrian, and Theodosius I were born in Hispania. Additionally, Emperor Augustus played a key role in establishing Roman rule in Spain through his campaigns against the Cantabrian Wars. The Cantabrian Wars, which were 29 to 19 BC, sometimes also referred to as the Cantabrian and Asturian Wars, were the final stage of the 2-century-long Roman conquest of Hispania, in what today are the provinces of Cantabria, Asturias, and Leon in northwestern Spain. It does not seem that the Romans pursued a policy of deliberate Romanization of their Spanish provinces, at least for the first 2 centuries of their presence there. Scipio left some of his wounded veterans at Italica in 206 AD. The Roman Senate allowed a settlement of 4,000 offspring of Roman soldiers and native women to be established at Cartea, in 171 AD, and further veteran settlements were probably placed at Corduba and Valentia, or what became Valencia, during the 2nd century BC. There had certainly been migration from Italy to the silver mining areas in the south during that period, and in Catalonia, Roman villas whose owners were producing wine for export appeared at Baitulo, which looks like became Badalona, before the end of the 2nd century. And that is, again, from Britannica. And by the way, just so I don't have to keep repeating this, as I read these slides, I have put my source at the bottom of each slide. So going forward, I'm not going to, read that portion. I'll just keep moving on. But if you want to take screenshots of the slides, the source will be at the bottom for you to use for your own research. Okay. It was not until the period of Julius Caesar and Caesar Augustus that full-scale Roman-style foundations were established for the benefit of Roman legionary veterans, some on already existing native towns, as at Terrico, and some on sites where there were relatively small-scale habitation previously. An inscription from one of those colonies, the Colonia Gentiva Iulia at Urso, or Osuna, which contains material from the time of its foundation under Julius Caesar, shows a community of Roman citizens with their own magistrates and religious towns, a town council and common land assigned to the town. And at that time, you can see what the different territories are. You've got Galatia, Lusitania, Baetica, Carthaginosis, and Tarraconensis. So it looks like there is still a little bit of a Carthaginian territory there, but much smaller than what had been there before. The Jewish merchants whose business pursuits brought them from Alexandria or Asia Minor to Rome and Italy, and then the Jewish warriors whom the emperors Vespasian and Titus, who were the conquerors of Judea, had dispersed as prisoners throughout the Roman provinces, found their way voluntarily or involuntarily into Gaul and Iberia. The Gallic Jews, whose first settlement was in the district of Arles, enjoyed the full rights of Roman citizenship, whether they arrived in Gaul as merchants or as fugitives, with the peddler's pack or in the garb of slaves. They were treated as Romans also by the Frankish and Burgundian conquerors. The most ancient legislation of the Franks and Burgundians did not consider the Jews as a distinct race, subject to peculiar laws. They just all were lumped in together with all of the people there. Numbers of them, the Jews, resided in, and then it listed a whole bunch of towns. And then so many dwelt in the province of Narbonne that a mountain near the city of that name was called Mons Judaicus. The territory of Narbonne belonged for a long time to Visigothic Spain, which we'll get to in a few minutes. And for this reason, the Jewish history of this district reflects all of the vicissitudes of the Jews on the further side of the Pyrenees. The Jews of the Frankish and Burgundian kingdoms carried on agriculture, trade, and commerce without any restraint. They navigated the seas and rivers in their own ships. They also practiced medicine, and the advice of the Jewish physicians was sought even by the clergy. The Catholic Christian clergy, who probably did not care to rely entirely on the miraculous healing powers of the saints and of the relics. They were also skilled in the use of weapons of war. The Jews, we're talking about still, were skilled in the use of the weapons of war and took an active part in the battles between Clovis, who was king of the Franks, and Theodoric, who was king of the Ostrogoths. So they took part in those battles before Arles, 508 AD. Besides their biblical names, the Jews of Gaul bore the appellations, which means name or title, which were common in the country, such as Armentarius, Gozolas, Priscus, or Siderius. They lived on the best of terms with the people of the country, and intermarriages even occurred between the Jews and the Christians. The Christian clergy did not scruple, meaning they did not hesitate or did not feel it was inappropriate to eat at Jewish tables, and in turn often entertained the Jews. And by Jews, I want to be clear, we're talking about the Hebrews, okay? We're talking about the Hebrews. So the higher ecclesiastics, however, took umbrage, meaning they took offense or annoyance, because the Jews refused at Christian banquets to eat of certain dishes, which the precepts of their religion forbade them to enjoy. For this reason, the Council of Vannes in 465 AD prohibited the clergy from taking part in Jewish banquets because they considered it undignified that Christians should eat the viands, which is food items, of the Jews, while the latter, the Jews, refused to eat of their certain dishes, thus making it appear as though the clergy were inferior to the Jews. But this decision of the council was of no avail. Canonical severity was powerless to stop this friendly intercourse, the friendly mingling between the two groups. Thus, in spite of their separation from Judea and Babylonia, which were the centers of Judaism at that time, the Jews of Gaul lived in strict accordance with the precepts of their religion. Wherever they settled, they built their synagogues and constituted their communities in exact agreement with the directions of the Talmud. And again, remember, the Talmud is what they picked up when they were in Babylon for those 70 years, which is not a good thing. But they were very much using it at that time. And I also found out through doing this research that the synagogues also came about as something they picked up in Babylon that they were not using prior to going into Babylon. So we see that even as they were dispersed all over after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, we see that they're still carrying on with these Babylonian traditions of the synagogues, the rabbis, and the rabbinical influence and the Talmud. So continuing to the second paragraph. The friendly relations existing between the Jews and the inhabitants of Gaul underwent no change, even when the country, by reason of Clovis's conversion, came under the rule of the Catholic Church. Clovis was indeed a bloodthirsty butcher, but he was not a fanatic. The clergy were under no obligations to him because he had abandoned... The clergy were under... Sorry about that. The clergy were under obligations to Clovis because he had abandoned heathenism for Christianity. And he did not need to yield to them in any way. As he left a hereditary kingdom to his successors, they were not placed in painful situations and dilemmas, as were the elective kings of the Visigoths, which would come later. And they were not obliged to make concessions or sacrifices to the church. Among the Franks, therefore, heathen customs remained long in vogue, and the Jews were permitted to live according to their religion without molestation. Now we're going to move into Gothic Hispania, and by Gothic I mean the Visigoths. As it was with the rest of the Western Roman Empire, Spain was subject to numerous invasions of Germanic tribes during the 4th and 5th centuries AD, resulting in the end of Roman rule and the establishment of the Germanic kingdoms, marking the beginning of the Middle Ages in Spain. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, 476 AD to be specific, parts of Hispania came under the control of the Germanic tribes of the Vandals, the Suebi, and the Visigoths. Spain's languages, its religion, and the basis of its laws originate from this Visigothic period. The Visigoths, Suebi, and Vandals, and Alans arrived in Hispania by crossing the Pyrenees mountain range, leading to the establishment of the Suebi kingdom in Galicia in the northwest. The Vandal kingdom of Vandalusia, which later became Andalusia, and then the Romanized Visigoths entered Hispania in 415 AD. The Visigoths, having sacked Rome 2 years earlier, arrived in Gaul in 412 AD, founding the Visigothic kingdom of Toulouse in the south of modern France, then gradually expanded their influence into Hispania after the Battle of Vouillé 507 AD at the expense of the Vandals and Alans, who moved on into North Africa without leaving much permanent mark on the Hispanic or Hispania culture. The Visigoths were initially converted to Arian Christianity around 360 AD from paganism. After the conversion of their monarchy to Roman Catholicism, and then after conquering the disordered Suebic territories in the northwest and the Byzantine territories in the southeast, the Visigothic kingdom of Toledo eventually encompassed a great part of the peninsula. In the laws of the Visigoths, the collection of which is called Fuero Juzgo, we learn how they divided the peninsula. The Goths took 2/3 of it for themselves, and they left 1/3 to the Romans, for by this name were the Spaniards of that time known to them. One of the statutes alluded to runs thus: the partition of the mountain lands made between the Goths and the Romans must not, in any wise, be broken, provided the boundary can be proved. The Romans must not take or lay claim to any portion of the 2/3 belonging to the Goths, nor the Goths to the remaining third which belongs to the Romans. Okay, and then here is a map of what became the Visigothic provinces. So still some of the same areas that were under the Roman rule, but looks like there's a few more territories in there as well. Okay, now we are finally getting to Sepharad or Sepharad. Sepharad is the ancient Hebrew word for Spain. Since biblical times, the Jewish people have referred to Spain as Sepharad. We see this in the book of Obadiah, where we are told that the exile of Jerusalem, which is in Sepharad, shall inherit the cities of the Southland. Well, where is Sepharad? The Targum Jonathan identifies it as Hispania, Spain. Thus, the Jewish people living in Spain and the Iberian Peninsula, as well as their descendants, became known as the Sephardim. And again, I just want to make this clear. We are talking about Hebrews, right? Not the Jews as we know the Jews today. Although to be fair, to be clear, the term Jew first was used in Babylon or after Babylon when they came out, referring to the people of Judah. Okay. So it is linked to the southern kingdom of Judah, to be fair. The earliest recorded Jewish settlements in Spain date back to the 3rd century, which would be the 200s AD, and Jews may have been living in Spain since the First Temple period. King Solomon's tax collector was said to have lived the end of his life there. And I will say that's what the Chabad.org has to say. The origins and history of Sephardic Hebrews. How did Hebrews end up in Spain? According to the Destiny Foundation, They state, as a result of intellectual and trade contracts with the Eastern Mediterranean empires, Egypt and Babylonia at that time, Spain's influence was known in ancient Israel. Jewish legend claims that Spanish kings were allies of King Nebuchadnezzar and were actual participants in the siege and destruction of Jerusalem with the first temple. Legend also says that as a reward for their help, Nebuchadnezzar transported Jews to Spain as slaves to serve the needs of the Spanish conquerors. These Hebrews were Kohanim, as well as members of the royal family of King David. As a possible confirmation of this, a scripture verse in Obadiah 1:20 speaks specifically of the exiled of this great army of Jews who were traitors, even to Sepharad and the exiled of Jerusalem, which is in Sepharad. Now, according to the Destiny Foundation, it says, Rossi, following the opinion of Yonatan ben Uziel, defined Zarephath as France and Sepharad as Spain. While there are some biblical commentators who assume that Zarephath and Sepharad to be names of Phoenician or Elamite cities from the early Middle Ages and onward, those place names came to designate France and Spain exclusively. During the time of the Roman Empire, especially after the destruction of the Second Temple, in 70 AD, there was a considerable Jewish Hebrew settlement in Spain. Spain became an ideological and sometimes physical battlefield between Jews and Christians. With Roman Catholicism becoming dominant in the 6th and 7th centuries AD, the Jewish community deteriorated. Spain's Jews/Hebrews were victimized by the church's attempt to convert them forcibly, an attempt that would be repeated numerous times over the centuries. Threatened with compulsory exile and taxed almost to the point of losing everything to governmental and church confiscations. By the beginning of the 8th century, it appeared quite unlikely that Spain would again be a host country for intensive Jewish Hebrew settlement. Okay, here is another quote from the Gentleman's Magazine, dated 1731. It says, "The Spanish Jews are the true descendants from the tribe of Judah and from the royal house of David. They were settled in Spain from the time of the captivity of the first temple by Nebuchadnezzar." So there is another witness. The Spanish Jews maintained that they had been transported hither after the destruction of the temple by the Babylonian conqueror, Nebuchadnezzar. Certain Jewish families, such as the Ibn Dauds and the Abrabanels, boasted descent from the royal house of David and maintained that their ancestors had been settled since time immemorial, partly in the district of Lucena, and partly in the environs of Toledo and Seville. And this book will be used quite a bit. El Negro, the Chosen One, Son of King Solomon by Waddell G. Jones. It's a fabulous book. The numerous Spanish Jewish Hebrew family of Nasi also traced back its pedigree to King David, and proved it by means of a genealogical table and seals. The family of the Ibn Albalias was more modest and dated its immigration only from the destruction of the Second Temple. A family tradition runs to the effect that the Roman governor of Spain begged the conqueror of Jerusalem, which would be, that would be Vespasian and Titus. So the Roman governor of Spain begged the conqueror of Jerusalem to send him some noble families from the capital of Judea, and that Titus complied with his request. So again, this is the Second Temple destruction in 70 AD. Among those thus transported was a man named Baruch, who excelled in the art of weaving curtains for the temple. This Baruch, who settled in Merida, was the ancestor of the Ibn Albalius. In these cities, as also in Rome, Milan, and Genoa, Jewish communities existed at this period. The Jews were also well represented in Lower Italy, especially in the beautiful town of Naples, in Palermo, Messina, and Agrigentum on the island of Sicily and in Sardinia. In Palermo, there lived Jewish families of ancient nobility who bore the name of Nassas, or also Nasi, which is of the Nasi just mentioned before by the previous author. Okay, and then it says there was a conversation in the 13th century between a philosopher named Thomas, this being Thomas Aquinas, a prominent 13th century theologian and philosopher, and King Alonso of Portugal, whence we may learn, if we can believe it, that a king of Spain who had assisted Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon in reducing Jerusalem brought so we're talking now the first temple destruction by Nebuchadnezzar, okay, he brought an enormous population into Spain, all from either the family of King David or at least from the tribe of Judah, and that the royal family resided first in Seville, then in Granada, adding that the exiles afterwards had their numbers greatly increased by fugitives from the desolation of the second temple. So apparently there was this a large amount of the royal family, and then also from the tribe of Judah that were brought into Spain after Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first temple. And then they're saying that after the destruction of the second temple in 70 AD, more were added to that, or more were brought in and added to the mix. But to come to rabbinical authors, Abrabanel, a prominent Jewish figure in Spain in the 15th century, and which would be the 1400s, and one of the king's trusted courtiers who witnessed the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, informed his readers that the first Jews to reach Spain were brought by ships to Spain by certain Pyrrhos, a confederate of the king of Babylon in laying siege to Jerusalem. Isaac ben Judah Abrabanel, Hebrew 1437, I guess he lived 1437 to 1508, who was commonly referred to as Abarbanel or Abarbanel, was a Portuguese Jewish statesman, philosopher, Bible commentator, and financier. This passage affirms that at the despair of the first temple, two families of the house of David came and settled in Spain. At least two. There might have been more. One at Lucena and the other, the Abrabanels, at Seville. And from these came 1,000 offshoots. This he, Isaac ben Judah Abrabanel, quotes from an earlier author, Isaac ben Gaith, in the works of the latter that now remain, that there is no such statement to be found. In the 17th century, Manasseh ben Israel, who had married a daughter of the Abrabanels, traced their origin in Spain to the Second Temple. Now, I am wondering, those of you who were with me for the Kingdom of Israel series, I believe it was video 5, do you guys remember the story of Manasseh ben Israel, who had written the book called The Hope of Israel, based on Montesinos, which I believe Montesinos, I think he was a Portuguese converso, or he might have been a Sephardic converso. Remember, he encountered the tribe of Reuben in, I believe it was Ecuador. So I'm wondering if that Manasseh ben Israel is the same person. So I thought that was interesting. If so, it's saying that he married a daughter of the Abrabanels, which is one of the royal houses of David. Okay, now the next several slides are coming from the history of the Jews in Spain from the time of their settlement in that country until the commencement of the present century, written and illustrated with diverse, extremely scarce documents. I always have to laugh at how long some of these titles are. Okay, and the author is Castro and Rossi. And I believe it was all written in Spanish, and then there was a theologian who translated it into English. He says, Castro and Rossi says, there is no nation under the sun whose history can be more interesting than that of the Jews, particularly that branch of them which, after the destruction of Jerusalem by Titus, emigrated to Spain, and for many centuries lived in that land which they regarded as their adopted country. In spite of the insults, the hardships, and the persecutions which they endured in Spain, the sons of Israel cultivated the arts and sciences, fed the lamp of literature, and kept it continually burning for a succession of ages, during which it may be justly said that the darkness covered the greater part of Europe, and gross darkness the people. That the Jews of Spain were far more enlightened than the Christians and Mohammedans of that country will appear from the pages of this history. And they go on to say, it was in the 70th year of the Christian era, after the destruction of Jerusalem by the Emperor Titus, son of Vespasian, that the Jews spread themselves all over the world and consequently came to swell the population of Spain, or Sepharad. Here they neither founded cities nor gave names to them, as some have asserted, without sufficient reason. They came, like conquered persons, to receive protection from others, not to build ramparts for themselves. In the cities which they were allowed to enter, they lived for many years mingled with the natives and other inhabitants. And then after that, by dint of hard labor, they had amassed riches. They made separate barriers that they might the better enjoy the comforts of life and hold congregations in their synagogues with the more perfect freedom. A very short time elapsed before the peace of the Jews was disturbed. In the year 303 AD, I'm assuming that's AD, the Catholic bishops assembled in council at Elabaris, and they forbade communication, dealings, or contracts with the Jews, as far as possible, alleging as a reason that the Jews were striving with most active and urgent importunities to bring over the people to the law of Moses. So they're trying to convert. They're proselytizing. Moreover, they, the bishops, thundered anathemas, which are curses, against all who should eat in company with the Israelites, and all who should allow the latter to bless the fruits which the lands of the Christians yielded spontaneously. From the time that Adolfo, who was the Visigothic king, who led the Visigoths to conquer and settle in southern Gaul and then Hispania, and his powerful host invaded the Spanish peninsula in 415 AD with fire and sword and reduced it to obedience with scarcely any opposition until the year 586 AD when Ricardo I began to reign, and abjuring Arianism, he embraced the Catholic religion. So rejecting Arianism, which the former Visigothic kings had embraced, he embraced the Catholic religion. and the Jews lived in peace and had regular trade and intercourse with both Goths and Spaniards. They were neither despised nor oppressed. Ricardo, after repudiating the doctrines of Arius and bringing over a large number of the Arian party to Catholicism, was the individual who opened the door to the persecution of the Hebrew people. In the council assembled at Toledo in the year 589 AD, it was decreed that the Jews should not hold public offices or have Christian mistresses or Christian slaves. So apparently they were, or had been, or it would not be a decree that it was no longer tolerated. And that all children of the latter born in captivity should be manumitted and brought over to the Catholic religion by the waters of baptism. The Hebrews were now numerous, and owing to their wealth, they were very powerful. And driven by outrage and persecution, they committed riots and disturbances in the kingdom. To close the door against such evils was the aim of Sisebuto, a man described to us as magnanimous, valiant in war, rigidly just in peace, always compassionate, and above all, a great zealot in the Christian cause. On which account, his great piety not allowing him to have subjects that were not Catholic, he ordered all Jews who would not receive baptism to be banished from Spain. Many of them fled to France at that time in order to escape giving up their law. But those, about 30,000 who remained in Spain to preserve their estates and dwellings, finding themselves forced into it by tortures and other extremely rigorous punishments, and threatened with death into the bargain, were baptized as Christians, continuing, however, to be Jews in heart, though Christian in name, as appeared by subsequent events. There is no reason to disbelieve that this was the cause of the persecution of the Jews in Spain by Sisebuto, and then after him by Dagobert, king of France. But before the times of the Emperor Heraclius and his auguries and prognostics, Ricardo had already begun to oppress and harass these people, whence I conclude that this Gothic monarch was rather influenced by some reason of state than led by the persuasion of others to check the evils occasioned to Christianity by the excess of liberty enjoyed by the Hebrews who lived in his dominions. A short time elapsed before Sisebuto discovered how little had been the success resulting from his measures. He saw that the calamities which had befallen his kingdoms, owing to his constraining the Jews to turn Christian, were on the increase. And like a barbarian and ignoramus, instead of attributing them to his own error in the choice of means to arrest their progress, he adopted other methods. I will not say equally, but even more cruel than the former. And in concurrence with the bishops and the nobles in the Cortes and Council of Toledo, 633 AD, he resolved that all who had received baptism should be compelled to observe the ceremonies of the Christian religion, that they should not be allowed to educate their young children, but that the latter should be entrusted to the care of old Christians. And finally, they were from that moment forbidden, under pain of perpetual slavery, to have any dealings with persons who had not come over to the faith. So those that chose to be forced to convert to Christianity, they would no longer be able to have any relationship with friends, family members, etc. of their community that did not convert. He says, "It will surely appear strange to some that after so many persecutions, the Jews should not only persevere in an obstinate adherence to their creed, but communicate it to others with a view to its general adoption in Spain. But from what has been said, it will be acknowledged that these men were reduced to a depth of extreme oppression and to the lowest and most miserable condition for the remainder of their lives. They found their hopes nipped in the bud, for the rigorous laws against the Hebrews were revived with additions to them in the Cortes in Council of Toledo in the reign of King Chintila in 638 AD. King Flavio Recesvinto also was desirous of applying a remedy to the evils continually and secretly brought on the countries over which his rule extended, by Jews who wore the cloak of Christians. In the council held at Toledo in the year 655 AD, he called on the prelates to make careful provision for closing the avenues to those malpractices of which the Jews were daily guilty, in spite of so many laws and penalties. They, the Jews, in the meantime, knowing what objects of suspicion they were to the king, and taught by past experience not to expect any favor from their opponents, addressed letters to Recesvinto, he says, which may be seen in the Fuero Juzgo, or Juzgo, in which they acknowledged that they had hitherto obstinately adhered to Judaism, but were now become real Christians, and would no longer observe any of the ceremonies of their law, and thus give clear proof to the complete renunciation of their errors. This frank declaration served to put a stop to the severities and cruelties practiced upon those Jews, and so the whole fury which the council had directed against them was limited to a renewal of the ancient laws and an order to the judges to carry them out with greatest rigor. But it was all in vain. They persevered in adhering to their law and communicating it to others, and the bishops and nobles continued to follow the mistaken and toilsome road that they had chosen to effect the extirpation of Judaism in Spain. The Jews were freemen in the eye of the law, although treated as harshly as slaves, and not only as slaves, but worse than the most destructive and ferocious animals. They had a religion forced upon them which did not accord with the principles instilled into them in their childhood. They were forbidden to abstain from articles of food, of which up to that time their laws had not allowed them to partake, and to which they had long entertained a feeling of repugnance, as they were not accustomed to them. On completing their 7th year, their children lost, if not the love, at least the kindness and fond caresses of their mothers, for they were taken from them to be educated in the Christian faith by persons not attached to them by ties of blood or friendship. So basically what they're saying is at age 7, their children were removed from their Jewish parents and homes and raised by Christians. I guess it said in one of the other slides, older Christians. Some think that these persecutions of the Jews were mitigated in the reign of King Witiza, a monarch portrayed to us by the historians of his day as a model of virtue, and by those nearest to ours as a monster of iniquity in all of its forms. Archbishop Roderick, in his Latin history of Spanish affairs, says that this monarch, Witiza, having violated the rights of the churches, raised the Jews to their former condition. So it seems he is for the Jews. He is pro-Jew, and honored them with privileges of greater immunity than he granted to the churches. The first writer who spread the report of King Witiza's giving orders for the return of the absent and persecuted Jews to Spain was Don Lucas, Bishop of Tuy. He composed a chronicle in the year 1235 AD, in the execution of which he did not adopt the opinion of any Gothic authors, but took hold of the popular fables or the false accounts of Arabic writers. It is positively certain that the sons of Witiza and other nobles, disgusted at Roderick's usurpation of the Gothic throne, at his cruel government and the wickedness of his life, went to Africa for the purpose of earnestly soliciting Musa to send Arab troops into Spain. This daring and renowned warrior listened to their statements, but before he engaged his word and his people in this enterprise, Musa began to make secret inquiries through the medium, the go-between, of the Jews that were settled in Africa, who carried on a constant correspondence with their Spanish brethren. The latter answered that Spain was destitute of strength and vigor, the kingdom was divided into factions, the castles were dismantled, many nobles were disgusted with the tyrannical yoke of their monarch, who was given up to vice, the plebeians were oppressed with misery, and the treasury was exhausted by reason of supply. So the Jews in Africa, the Hebrews in Africa, confirmed to Musa the condition of their Spanish brethren. So the Jews in Spain likewise offered to render all the assistance in their power towards the capture of Spain, provided that after its conquest, permission was granted to them, their wives and children, to live according to the law of Moses, and that the Arabs not be allowed to molest or afflict them with punishments or other severities. This answer fired the mind of Musa and encouraged him to try and obtain so easy a prize. And so, having the caliph's permission, he ordered the chieftain Tariq, this being Tariq ibn Ziyad, to land with some picked cavalry on the opposite coast of Andalusia. He passed the Straits of Hercules with 500 Arab cavalry in 4 large barks or ships, and made a successful descent upon the Spanish shores. The Muslims made incursions and carried off some cattle and people, while no one went out to encounter them. With this prize and good fortune, Tariq returned to Tangier, where he was well received. Musa then raised a powerful army and placed it under the command of the same chieftain, Tariq. These troops passed through the straits of Gibraltar and jumped on shore at the place where Algeciras is now situated. The Spaniards made an ineffectual attempt to hem them in and defend the pass against them, and then after some skirmishes they took flight, so they ran away. Tariq commanded his ships to be burned in order to deprive his army of any certain means of escape from death, in the event of its experiencing a reverse of fortune, an action which was imitated 9 centuries later at the conquest of New Spain by Hernan Cortes, and which has been so highly eulogized by the historians of that enterprise. The Spanish chieftain who made face against the Arabs was named Tadmir. He it was who wrote to inform the king of the arrival of the people from Africa, and made mention of his own exertions to maintain the pass against them, when he was unexpectedly attacked and obliged to yield to superior numbers. He added that the enemy was encamped in the country, and beginning to make incursions, and that the king must send to his relief all the men he could muster, and in conclusion, that such was the necessity and strait as he was in, that unless the king himself took the field with all the forces of his realm, its loss was inevitable. King Roderick was alarmed at the news, and assembling his council and the principal gentlemen that resided at his court, and his personal attendants, harangued them thus: A horde of African savages have invaded our territories, laid waste the country, carried off cattle, and taken many into captivity. All who offered resistance to them have been scattered with the same rapidity that an eagle scares away a flight of pigeons. Make ready your arms and horses. Hands on your swords, off to the Arab camp. Down with their squadrons, make a terrible and frightful slaughter of them. Ye are the descendants of those Goths who were the terror of Rome. Ye are the descendants of those Goths who were the dread and the admiration of the world. In a word, ye are the flower and the glory of Spain. On, on. Let not your delay allow their God time to come and help them. Our God has put weapons into our hands and courage into our hearts. Roderick raised an army of 90,000 men and arrived with them at the plains of Xerez. All the nobility of his kingdom had received a summons to take part in this expedition. The Arab chieftains collected their cavalry, which was at the time disbanded and employed in making incursions. When his squadrons were drawn up, Tariq made them a speech to the following effect. Muslims, see ye that powerful army under the feet of which the earth trembles and quakes, and hear ye how it makes the air resound with the clashing of arms, the noise of drums and trumpets, and with what shout it animates itself for combat? Do you observe how far superior in numbers it is to our own? Well then, turn your eyes in the other direction, and what do ye behold? A sea which will cut off your retreat, if fortune should deal hardly with us, and bring upon us an unhappy reverse. If ye fall by the hands of that army, ye will die an honorable and glorious death. If ye disperse it, those lands and all the riches that ye find upon them will be your own. God and our intrepidity can alone save us. The morning had no sooner appeared than the two armies engaged with the fury of enemies, and during the whole of that day the victory remained doubtful. The shades of night parted the combatants and put a stop to the bloody carnage. When the rays of the sun shot forth the next morning, they engaged again with like success. Fortune was neither favorable nor unfavorable to either party. On the third day of the fearful encounter, Tariq, seeing that the spirits of the Muslim troops began to decline, stood up in his stirrups and, encouraging his horse, raised his voice and said, "Brave Muslims, ever victorious, never vanquished, what blind madness inspires you to give up the field and the victory to this Gothic enemy? Follow me then. Our honor is in the power of that army. Let us wrest it out of their hands, and let all who compose it fall by ours." And then, giving reins to his spirited horse, he dashed into the midst of the Gothic army, trampling down and wounding all who vainly attempted to arrest his progress. The Muslims attacked the enemy, who considered the victory as all but won, with like spirit. Both sides fought with unexampled fury, foot to foot. They also wounded and slew each other with pikes and swords. The cavalry, as the ground was level, hurled their lances at random, rushing into the midst of the enemy's ranks and retreating from them at half speed. And though both they and their horses were covered with wounds, this did not prevent them from fighting like valiant warriors. At this time, Tariq came up with the war chariot in which Roderick was riding, and he boldly attacked him, Roderick, and pierced the king's breast through with a dart of his lance. The unfortunate king fell down dead, and Tariq cut off his head and sent it to Musa, to give him a proof of the success which had attended his arms. On the death of the king and many of the great men of the Gothic nobility, the survivors began to slacken the fight and retreat. The Arabs did not obtain this victory without loss, for the most courageous of them either fell or were very severely wounded in the battle. All over the field, lamentation was variously mixed with joy, pleasure with pain. The air resounded with the music of the drums and trumpets which proclaimed the success of Tariq's armies, and with these were mingled the cries of the wounded and the dying. This frightful encounter took place in the year 711 AD. Such of the Gothic nobility as had found means to escape with their lives withdrew to their principal cities. The Spanish Jews now saw that the time to break their chains was drawing nigh, and they began to recover their breath. Into each of the large cities that Tariq won, whether by fire and sword or by capitulations that were honorable and advantageous to the vanquished, he placed a garrison of Arabs, in whose charge he left them, while he relied for their main security on the multitude of the Jews, into whose hands he had placed arms, in order to obtain assistance from them in this expedition for the reduction of the Spanish peninsula, and at the same time to help them to escape from their captivity and to destroy those who had, for so many years, oppressed the descendants of the ancient Jewish nation. With these, and with a small part of his army, he defended the cities of Seville, Cordova, Toledo, and others. Granada was entrusted to the Jews alone, and for this reason it came to be known at the commencement of the Arab dominion in Spain by the name of Jewstown. I think the smallness of the number of Christians who sided with the Muslims when Spain was lost is clearly shown by the fact that there were not enough of them to fortify the populous cities. The Jews, on the other hand, were numerous, and all of them well affected to the conquerors for two reasons. First, because the latter had accepted the invitation sent to them, First, because the latter, the conquerors, had accepted the invitation sent them to accomplish the capture and reduction of the Spanish peninsula. And then secondly, because it was owing to the assistance of the Arabs that they had freed themselves from the oppression in which they had lived so unhappily and so miserably for so long a period. The Arab conquerors of Spain, indebted as they were to the highly favorable reception they met with at the hands of the Jews, while engaged in the conquest of these lands, as soon as they had reduced them, the Goths, to obedience and had begun to reap the fruits of peace, kept the small remnant of the Goths just out of pure spite, shut up in a corner of the peninsula, while they allowed the Hebrews full liberty to live according to the Mosaic law. And thus the Jews laid the foundations of numerous synagogues in the larger and more considerable towns. The barbarous persecution raised against the Jews in the East by the Caliph Cator, the Caliph or the Caliph Cator of the dynasty of the Fatimites, forced many of those persecuted Jews in those areas to seek in Spain the termination of their misfortunes. And as the Hebrews who lived in the East were men of much learning, it resulted that the greater part of the newcomers to these lands began to adorn them with their writings and to found academies in order to diffuse among the people their own remarkable knowledge in every branch and art of science. So basically, as the persecution in the East amped up under the Caliph or the Caliph, those Hebrews also left the East and went west to join the Jews in Spain. With North Africa's Arabs also came its Moors, Berbers, and Jews. So now we've got some African Jews coming to join the party. The Moors originally came from North Africa, particularly the areas of what are now Morocco and Algeria. They were of mixed Berber and Arab ethnicity, with Berbers being the predominant group. Okay, so I want to make a designation here because I have had a handful of Hebrews. There seems to be some confusion. The Moors are not Hebrews, okay? The Moors is a term to describe a mixture of Berber and Arab ethnicity, okay? With Berbers being the predominant group. And the Berbers were in North Africa. The term Moor is derived from the Latin term maris, which was used by the Romans to describe the inhabitants of the Roman province of Mauritania, which encompassed parts of modern-day Algeria and Morocco. The Muslim Moors, again, being North African Arabs and Berbers, arrived in Spain in 711 AD. They crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, led by Tariq ibn Ziyad, and conquered much of the Iberian Peninsula. These Moors successfully conquered much of the Visigothic kingdoms of Hispania, eventually establishing Al-Andalus, a Muslim kingdom that lasted for nearly 800 years, which encompassed most of the Iberian Peninsula. The Muslim Arabs were tolerant not only of their Moor and Berber co-religionists, but of the Jews and to a much lesser degree the Christians as well. There were many reasons for this tolerance, but practical necessity was the most important one. Although the Arabs formed the ruling class in Spain, they were unable to provide the necessary governmental and social infrastructure to effectively govern the society. Unable to rule efficiently and profitably by themselves, they willingly allowed the Jews to assume many of the burdens of leadership, investment, and policy making, as long as the proper master-servant relationship between Muslim and Jew was maintained. The Jews, and to a lesser extent the Christians, became the needed tax collectors, custom brokers, and agents, the diplomats, and the civil servants of Muslim Spain. The Jews also maintained trade contracts with their Jewish brethren throughout the world and soon became the leading merchants in the country. The Arab rulers found the Jews to be the natural vehicle for developing Spain and enriching the Muslim ruling class. Thus was born the European model of the productive and sometimes indispensable Jewish functionary who would be tolerated and even rewarded as long as he knew his place. There was a time when the Hebrew Jews of Spain enjoyed peace, tranquility, and prosperity to raise their children and teach them the Holy Torah without persecution, but they had to unite with the Moors in order to achieve this peace of mind. The Jews of Spain were utterly embittered and alienated by Catholic rule at the time of the Muslim invasion. The Moors were perceived as a liberating force and welcomed by Jews eager to help them administer the country. In many conquered towns, the Muslims left garrisons in the hands of the Jews before going ahead further north. Thus started the period that became known as the Golden Age for Spanish Jews. Okay, so again, this name may ring a bell for those of you. I mentioned him briefly in one of the videos in the Kingdom of Israel series, and we're going to learn more about him. So talking about the Jews' Golden Age, okay, which was roughly the time period of 900 AD to 1200 AD. Okay, that's the time period we're talking about. So Arthur Kessler, author of the 13th Tribe, he writes about Hasdai ibn Shaprut. Okay, so Ibn is very similar to like in Hebrew when they say Israel ben Uziel. So Ben means son of. Ibn means son of. So this is Hasdai, son of Shaprut. And he, in between the year 954 and 961 AD, Hasdai ibn Shaprut, an ethnic Judean serving as chief minister to the caliph, or the Caliph of Cordoba. He was of a very good reputation, known as the most brilliant figure in the Golden Age of the Jews of Spain. In 929 AD, I'm not sure if that's pronounced Abdul or if it's just Abad al-Rahman III, a member of the Umayyad dynasty, succeeded in unifying the Moorish possessions in the southern and central parts of the Iberian Peninsula under his rule, and founded the Western Caliphate. His capital in Cordoba became the glory of Arab Spain and a focal center of European culture with a library of 400,000 catalogued volumes. Hasdai, born about 910 AD in Cordoba into a distinguished Jewish family, first attracted the caliph's attention as a medical practitioner with some remarkable cures to his credit. Abad al-Rahman appointed Hasdai as his court physician and trusted his judgment so completely that he was called upon first to put the state finances in order, then to act as foreign minister and diplomatic troubleshooter in the new caliphate's complex dealings with Byzantium, the German Emperor Otto, and also with Castile, Navarra, Aragon, and other Christian kingdoms in the north of Spain. Hasdai was a true uomo universal, which means universal man or Renaissance man. Centuries before the Renaissance, who, in between affairs of state, still found time to translate medical books into Arabic, to correspond with the learned rabbis of Baghdad, and to act as a Maecenas, which means a generous patron of the arts, for Hebrew grammarians and poets. Hasdai had heard about, so in the midst of all of this, and he's highly favored, he's in a very high position, but he hears about a free and thriving Jewish kingdom from some merchant traders in Persia, and he was very eager to know more about this Jewish kingdom. So he sent a letter by courier to King Joseph of this kingdom. According to author Mr. Kessler, the letter contained a list of questions about the Khazar state, its people, method of government, its rights in observing the Sabbath, armed forces, and so on, including an inquiry as to which of the 12 tribes of Israel King Joseph belonged. This seems to indicate that Hasdai believed the Jewish Khazars to hail from Palestine as the Spanish Jews did, and perhaps even to represent one of the lost tribes. Joseph, or King Joseph, not being of Jewish descent, belonged, of course, to none of the tribes. In Hasdai's letter to King Joseph, he gives a glowing account of the prosperity of Moorish Spain, about the pleasant living conditions of the Judeans under Caliph Abad al-Rahman. The name of the country where these Judeans live is called, in Hebrew, Sepharad or Sepharad, but how the Ishmaelites who inhabit it call it Al-Andalus. Hasdai ibn Shaprut ends his letter with the following words: I feel the urge to know the truth, whether there is really a place on this earth where harassed Israel can rule itself, where it is subject to no one. If I were to know that this is indeed the case, I would not hesitate to forsake all honors, to resign my high office, to abandon my family, and to travel over mountain and plains, over land and water, until I arrived at the place where my lord the king rules. And I also have one more request: to be informed whether you have any knowledge of the possible date of the final miracle, which is the coming of Messiah, which, wandering from country to country, we are awaiting. Dishonored and humiliated in our dispersion, we have to listen in silence to those who say, every nation has its own land, and you alone possess not even a shadow of a country on the earth. So this is very telling in what he says, because obviously these Jews, or these Hebrews, have rejected Yeshua or Yeshaya as the Messiah, as Mashiach, right? So they're still waiting for the Messiah to come. But again, it's because they're following the Talmud, and the Talmud was very much against the teachings of Yeshua, or also called Yeshaya, because he was rejected. Remember, even by the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He was rejected by most of those that had been in Babylon or considered rabbis. Okay, so just to clarify that. Now, Arthur Kessler wrote, King Joseph's narrative starts with a eulogy of his ancestor, King Bulan, a great conqueror and a wise man who drove out the sorcerers and idolaters from his land. His reply, so just FYI here, prior to converting to Judaism, these Khazars were massively pagan. Very, very, very pagan. And they practiced a religion called Tengrism, or Tengrinism. Tengrism, I believe is how it's pronounced. So King Joseph is saying he's related from King Bulan, a great conqueror. But Mr. Kessler says his reply is less accomplished and moving than Hasdai's letter. It starts with a fanfare of greetings, then reiterates the main contents of Hasdai's letter, proudly emphasizing that the Khazar kingdom gives the lie to those who say that the scepter of Judah has forever fallen from the Jews' hands, and that there is no place on earth for a kingdom of their own. Kagan Joseph then proceeds to provide a genealogy of his people. Though a fierce Jewish nationalist, proud of wielding the scepter of Judah, he cannot and does not claim for them Semitic descent. He traces their ancestry not to Shem, but to Noah's third son Japheth, more precisely to Japheth's grandson Togarma, the ancestor of all Turkish tribes. King Joseph says, We have found in the family registers of our fathers that Togarma had 10 sons, and the names of their offspring are as follows: Uger, Dursa, Avars, Huns, Basili, Tarniak, Khazars, Zagora, Bulgars, and Sabir. We are the sons of Khazar, the 7th. Okay, moving on. It says Professor Henreich Graetz says, we turn gladly from the decay of the internal organization of the Jews in the East to the vitality of the communities on the Guadalquivir and the Guadiana. Vigorous forces and spiritual currents of most varied character asserted themselves everywhere and produced the brilliant efflorescence of Jewish culture. There arose in the Jewish communities of Andalusia intense zeal for the various branches of knowledge and an eager desire for creative activity. The seed which had been sown by Hasdai, Ibn Shabrut, the Jewish Mycenas, by the study of the Talmud under Moses the Babylonian, and by the poetical and philological works of Menachem and Dunash, produced the fairest fruit. Many-sided knowledge was considered among the Spanish Jews as well as the Andalusian Muslims a man's most beautiful ornament, and brought its possessor honor and riches. During the time of the Arab dominion in Spain, the province of Andalusia contained 4 kingdoms. These were Jaén, Granada, Seville, and Cordova. Professor Henreich Graetz had this to say about the Jews of Andalusia. He said, "The Andalusian Jews were equally active in Bible exegesis and grammar, in the study of the Talmud, in philosophy, and in poetry. Nor were science and art looked upon by the Spanish Jews as mere ornaments, but they exalted and ennobled their lives. Many of them were filled with that enthusiasm and ideality which does not allow the approach of any kind of meanness. The prominent men who either through their political position or their merits stood at the head of Jewish affairs in Spain were for the most part noble characters imbued with the highest sentiments. They were as chivalrous as the Andalusian Arabs and excelled them in magnanimity, a characteristic which they retained long after the Arabs had become degenerate." They took great pride in their ancestry and certain families, as those of the Ibn Ezra, Al-Fakar, Al-Nakfa, Ibn Falya, Ibn Giyat, Ben Veniste, Ibn Migash, Abul Afia, and others formed the nobility. They did not use their birth as a means to obtain privileges, but saw therein an obligation to excel in knowledge and nobility, so as to be worthy of their ancestors. No wonder then that the Jews of Spain were looked upon as superior beings by their uncultured brethren in other lands, such as France, Germany, and Italy, and that they gladly yielded them the precedence which had formerly been enjoyed by the Babylonian academies. Cordova, Lucena, and Granada soon took the place of Sora and Pumbeditha, these being prestigious academies of learning in Babylon. All right, well, that is all I have for part 6A. On our next video, we are going to continue and pick up so we're around, 1200, or 900 to maybe to 1100 in the history of those Sephardic Hebrews. And so when we pick up with the next video, 6B, we're going to move forward into the introduction of Ferdinand and Isabella, and just the onslaught and the just all of the atrocities that the Catholic Church under these two monarchs heaped on those Sephardic Hebrews. So we will pick up with that in our next video. And again, it is so good to be back with you guys. It's so good to be able to do another video. I hope you found this interesting. And I actually was really just floored as I was doing the research for this, because I knew a general outline kind of the history, but I had no idea that the Jews or the Hebrews in Sepharad, or in Spain, had actually reached out to their African counterparts and had invited the Arabs and the Moors in to help liberate them. So anyway, I hope you found this really interesting and learned some things, and I will see you next time. Take care. Be blessed. Bye-bye.